Today I'll be sharing information about Parental Rights Amendment and how it is so important that we are able to understand the significance of this amendment and adopting it into our U.S. Constitution. The intent of this meeting is basically an informational gathering to learn and to support the Parental Rights Amendment for the United States. And this assembly is also a great opportunity to sign the parental rights petition so that we can send this to Neil Abercrombie, who is our district congressman, and we'll be able to give our support as well as to urge him to be a co-sponsor of the parental rights. So this information that I'll be sharing with you is from the parentalrights.org and can also be found out in the handouts, which are in back, which my mom will give. About 80 years ago, the Supreme Court had declared that the child is not the mere creature of any state, but those who nurture him and direct his destiny have the right, coupled with the high duty, to recognize and prepare him for additional obligations. This comes from the Supreme Court case of Pierce versus Society of Sisters in 1925. And now 30 years ago, the court also continued this line of reasoning with the pronouncement that the primary goal of parents in the upbringing of their children is now established beyond debate as an enduring American tradition. Wisconsin versus Yoder case in 1972. Yet in 2000, the state of Washington gave any person the ability to override a good parent's decision about visitation, and simply claiming that it would be the best for the children to allow a third party to have these visitation rights in the Supreme Court Troxel versus Granville case. Now we realize that there is a shift occurring in our opinion in the courts. Justice Thomas was the only justice to clearly state that parental rights receive the same high legal standard of protection as any other fundamental rights in our Constitution. However, the majority, and according to Justice Scalia, they held that the constitutionality of protected rights are not even existent. As the consequence, of course, undermining parental rights, it caused numerous federal courts to refuse to treat parental rights as any other fundamental right in our own Constitution. At the same time, America is positioned to adopt the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child Treaty. President Obama supports this treaty, and the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, as well as her husband, have been leading advocates for this treaty for well over 20 years. Senator Barbara Boxer also has promised that this treaty will be ratified during this term of Congress. If this treaty is ratified, the laws of all 50 states on children and on parents would be superseded by this international law by virtue of specific provision in the U.S. Constitution, which declares that treaties are supreme over state law. This means that our lawmakers will not be able to directly protect the rights of the children and on American families because they would need to make room for this new law. The second condition would be that good and fit parents would no longer would be entitled for legal presumptions that they act in the best interests of their children. Instead, the government will have the authority to overrule all parents on any decision concerning the child, and if the government believed it could make a better decision than those parents. Parents would no longer be able to spank their children or discipline them of how they wanted to, and children would have the legal right for their own religion. Parents, along with other subjects, would only be permitted to give advice. America would be under the binding legal obligation to massively increase its federal spending on unnecessary children's programs. And these are just a few of the effects of this treaty if it is ratified. We cannot wait until our rights are fundamentally swept underneath us. We need to act now to stop this international law and to protect these two key principles. First, that fit parents would be allowed to directly upbring their own children, and American legislators, not international tribunals, which should make public policy for America on families and on their children. The proposed Parental Rights Amendment, which will counteract the UN treaty, is on page 2 of the handouts that were given to you earlier. And it as follows: Section 1, the liberty of rights to direct the upbringing of education of their children is a fundamental right. Section 2, neither the United States nor any state shall infringe upon this right without demonstrating that its governmental interest, as applied to the person, is the highest order and not otherwise served. So basically, that the lawmakers do not make decisions that conflict with this amendment, like the court's movement against the parental rights under this current law. Now, Section 3 says that no treaty may be adopted, nor shall any source of international law be employed to supersede, modify, interpret, or apply to the rights guaranteed by this article. And this specifically addresses the UN Rights of the Child Treaty. Whether the CRC is adopted by the U.S. Senate or imposed by forces of customary international law, the result would be the same. Parents would lose their ability to make decisions of their own children. At best, the government will have constant grounds to challenge the everyday decisions that parents make, even in the privacy of their own homes. And at worst, the state will have the power to override the decisions of parents and become, in effect, the true parent of every American child. Throughout the history of the United States of America, it has recognized that and defended the rights of the parents to rise up and to protect their own children. It is time for all Americans to affirm the vital parent and child relationship, to rise up and to defend these parental rights within the text of our own Constitution. This is the only way to secure parental rights forever for our children, their children, and the future generations to come. As C. Everett Koop, a former U.S. Surgeon General, says, life awards no greater responsibility, no greater privilege than the raising of the next generation. And so we see these parental rights are being challenged on two fronts, in our own Supreme Court as well as an international treaty. We know that we need to ratify this law, and we need to make a swift and radical change. But this would also come to it. If the treaty is not ratified, we also face parental right challenges here in our own country through the courts because of their recent decisions. We must act now and begin as a grassroots effort to inform our communities, gather support, and engage our culture so that we would let our legislators know, like Neil Abercrombie, that we want this parental rights amendment and that we want him to sign as a co-sponsor. Currently, there are 6 U.S. Senate co-sponsors for the SJ Resolution 16, and there are 128 U.S. congressional co-sponsors for the HJ Resolution 42. We know that we need to do something to protect our parental rights and for the rights of our children and our children to come. If you can go to How You Can Take Action page, which is, I think, the last page in your handouts, it starts with saying call. We need to call our U.S. congressmen and women and our U.S. senators, and we also need to be able to communicate with one another through the Pro-Activist email network or any other network with our legislatives so that we are also giving back to our community. Once we are able to do this, we can engage our community and being able to collect supporting signatures. The goal is basically to have 2,000 signatures so that we can approach Neil Abercrombie to say that we want this amendment to be set and applied to our Constitution. So we see the challenges and the problems that are encroaching on our fundamental rights, and therefore we need to take action. So I ask you to join with me in supporting the Parental Rights Amendment in order to safeguard each generation's parental rights. Thank you. Now with that, I would like to ask Representative Kimberly Pine to come up to kind of further explain what an effect would be on our community if the UN Rights of the Child was ratified, and also if these court decisions were continued, as well as what plan of action would you give for this deterioration of parental rights. So with that, let's welcome Representative Pine.